of our race and our race in relations forum. This one talks about that dreaded word, symbolism. And we will talk about some educational, some points that came out about educational forum. And for that reason, I have invited Dr. David Mack to be with Percy Mack.
I have a cousin named David.
I know. He's not David Mack anymore.
No.
Dr. Percy Mack, I'm so sorry. To talk about education, as well as Ellen Weaver. If you remember, Ellen was on our education forum, and there were so many unanswered issues in that forum. We decided to do maybe a summary of those points. With us tonight, as well, is Senator John Scott. Hopefully I got you. John. Good. Senator John Scott. Senator Scott has been very vocal on the things that he believes that are impeding progress in African American communities, as well as interracial relationships and the economic growth of the African American and Latino communities. So I wanted him here to talk about the political aspect. Now, our political science expert is on his way from Charleston. He's caught in traffic on I-26, so that means he may or may not be here. If you've been on I-26 lately, it is horrible. And that's Dr. Todd Shaw, is in the political science department of USC. And what I told him is that you're going to have to pay for this. So when you come, you're doing the summary. So what I'll ask our panelists if they would come up now, and we'll get started. I still see some folks in the parking lot. So as they come, but we want to be respectful of your time. So we're going to try to get started now, and as folks come in, they can join the conversation. I'm going to start this, and I know Senator Scott, I put a lot of the burden on your shoulder, but I would love for all three of our panelists to chime in on this. I'm going to read an excerpt from a statement made by Senator Ben Tillman of South Carolina. Now, and keep in mind the time frame, and keep in mind the sentiment during that time, and keep in mind that not everybody not all the white citizens of South Carolina had his mindset. But listen to what he had to say. In 1900, he said, "We have done our level best to prevent blacks from voting. We have scratched our heads to find out how we could eliminate the last one of them. We stuck ballots, we shot them, and we are not ashamed of it." Now, he said that in 1900. In 1909, in Anderson, with a reunion of what was called the Red Shirts, he summarized what happened back in Hamburg, South Carolina, not too far from Ellenburg, Edgefield County, a little small town in Edgefield County. And he was telling what happened there. If you may recall from your history lessons, it may not have been in your South Carolina history book, but if it wasn't, let me educate you. The purpose of our visit to Hamburg was to strike terror. And the next morning, which was Sunday, when the Negroes who had fled to the swamp returned to town, some of them never did return, but kept on going. The ghastly sight which they met when they gazed on 7 dead Negroes lying stark naked and stiff, certainly that had an effect on them. It was now after midnight, and the moon high in the heavens looked down peacefully on the deserted town and the dead Negroes, whose lives had been offered up as a sacrifice to the fanatical teachings and fiendish hates of those who sought to substitute the rule of the African for that of the Caucasian in South Carolina. Why would I bring that up? We're talking about symbolism. That's going to be the first issue on the table. There's been a lot of discussion about Ben Tillman's statue in Clemson, buildings named after Ben Tillman. How do you feel, and Senator Scott, I'll start with you. That is a part of South Carolina history. But how do you feel that that history impacts African American youth?
Well, first let me thank all of you for participating in this discussion. I think what we're now seeing of colleges and universities across the country, there was even an article this morning as related to the University of Texas and removing some statues that they have. The new young South Carolinian and young Americans are not interested in past history and really want to move beyond the racial hatred and racial tension. And for the first time in this country, we are probably embracing more of a mixed culture of African Americans and majority people who, in many cases, they either have never been to school with all whites, never been to school with all blacks. And if most of you who may have grandchildren, if you had a party right now and gave a kid a list of folk to invite, you'd be surprised. You would probably get a multicultural group of people who actually come. And so I think if you look at, by the way, my son's in the back, and he would be one of those ones who probably never been to school. And so now we are some 40 years later, when that part of symbolism that people use for racial hatred, the American public as a whole are not interested in that. Those who would say when we remove the flag as a very good example, that we were taking their heritage down. The question of heritage is a combined effort. Your heritage to me was hatred. Your heritage to you was control. And when you start talking about people like Ben Tillman, who really didn't want people of color go to the University of South Carolina, but still we've got statues at Clemson and we've got other statues across the state that represent what he did for South Carolina, and not so much as what he stood for in South Carolina, and I for he kept South Carolinians back in terms of having its real place in growth. And now, some 40 years later, we're beginning to see some potential growth in our economy. But if we really look at the people of South Carolina as a whole, we're still poor. You cannot have 25% doing well and the other 75% doing bad. And we are a state of many, many colleges and universities, so there's really no excuse. And back in, I think, 92, 93, I spent many years getting a state lottery pass. And that whole goal was to give kids an opportunity to go to college, but in many cases their parents could not pay for them to go to college. Every major university, the big three as they call themselves, and other majority universities raised tuition. Why? It was a vehicle in to keep students out. And that's not where we need to be. We need to try to find ways to either educate our people or we're going to keep it concentrated. So these folk with all these negative symbols, I would say to you, people who are looking for progressive places to bring their families to, and especially athletes who want to come and probably stay here, and other people in corporate America, they're not going to come because they don't like that kind of behavior. And people in general are just kind of tired.
I saw you, Ellen, moving your head up and down, especially when he talked about the younger generation not into this diverse kind of activity and symbolism.
Well, I think what Charleston meant to me and what I learned, and I just want to emphasize that I'm here to learn as much as I am to explain. But I think that there's a lot of people in my generation who have never fully appreciated or understood a lot of these issues, because frankly it's not something that we've really been confronted with because of this increased diversity. so what Charleston meant for me was a new way of understanding the world around me through someone else's eyes. And I think that was an experience for a lot of South Carolinians, and that is why I'm so proud of our state. When I hear you read just the deplorable things that have been said as a part of our state's history, it makes it that much more just unbelievable to me that those Charleston families could stand up there and forgive the man who shot their relatives. And that to me is the power of the moment that we're in, and why I'm so happy to be here and to just be able to hear all these different perspectives.
Dr. Mack.
Thank you. Good afternoon, everyone. Good evening. And one of the things that, as we look at the symbolism of what you read here, during that time, those dead bodies would have generated a fear. You spoke about the fear when they came back from the swamps and that type of thing. We saw what dead bodies generated in Charleston. They generated determination, generated a unity of people. When the people were out, with the flag, it was a diverse group. Old, young, black, white, other minorities. And that would not have probably been the case in 1900. In 1900, there would have been probably less talk about taking down the flag than more talk. But as young people have gone to school and have, realized that they've moved away from what they were told, that African Americans weren't smart, African Americans couldn't do certain things, they would be criminal, all of those kinds of things. And young people have gone to school and they found out those things are not true. That was the reason, I feel, for the separation, because the separation created ignorance. And when ignorance exists, then everybody has stereotypes of everyone else. And it took some time for those stereotypes to go away. As one who integrated high schools in Savannah, Georgia, there were initial stereotypes. It was very tough. There were places in the school we could not walk. If we wanted to go to a particular class, and our school's in a box formation, you might have to walk all the way around to avoid an area where you might be assaulted or treated very rudely. So rather than go through that, you would go all the way around. But by the time that I finished school, we had a young man who was in the class with me who was going to Yale University. He would have been on the team with Calvin Hill. He was the number 17 graduate in our class of 614. And he passed away one night at a basketball game. He didn't even play. He didn't even feel. He had a heart condition. And he died on the bench. And that was the first time that we had an integrated funeral in the city of Savannah, where people sat next to others, and they weren't sitting in the balcony or whatever the case might be. So, from 1900 to now, yes, there's still issues. When you have minority and majority, there may always be issues, but you have less ignorance. Now, whether people do something about the lack of ignorance is another case, but people know that ignorance to a great degree has come down.
Ellen mentioned something, you talked about hearing maybe for the first time what Ben Tillman had to say about blacks. And could it possibly be that there are whites who want to keep Tillman's legacy in place because they don't know? They don't know he made those kinds of statements. And is it a fault of our education system that they don't know? I'll start with you, Ellen, and then I'll go to the Senator.
Yeah, I think, you know, to your point about people just being ignorant and purposely being kept ignorant about the reality of the history of our state, I think that's a very real thing. And I think that, again, that is why, to me, this tragedy in our state has opened up a vista of new dialogues and the chance to have honest conversations about things and confront things in ways that are productive, that we would have rather just left under the rug, but that if we're ever going to move forward as a state, we have to talk about openly and honestly and deal with. And I think there's a huge passion in my generation for reconciliation and for moving our state beyond the sins of our past. And that's why I am so thankful to be included in a diverse room like this, on a diverse panel, because I just think that there are many people, especially in this younger generation, who sincerely desire a chance to bring our state together in a way that we've never been brought together before.
Well, I really want to revisit an earlier statement. Let me say this, and I'm going to try to be as nice as I can and try to keep my Jones Center hat out of here. African Americans have been some of the most forgiving people for as long as they have been here in America. Charleston was just one of the first times in a long time that we were so visible across the world that we wanted to do something different to show the world that we can, in fact, do better. But the real hidden behavior is that, let me qualify it. I spent my early career in the governor's office. I spent over 7.5 years traveling across the state. And I would tell you, in small rural South Carolina towns, there is no difference in behavior then as it was, as now as it was then. Let me qualify that. If you look at who runs the downtown, who handles the mortgages, the insurance companies, the stores, and if you get what's so-called blackball or can't come into this establishment, puts you in a position that you have to open yourself or you have to move out. In many cases, and just until lately, you now start seeing all the news reports, CNN and others are now chiming in, not only in South Carolina, all across the country, behavior by how people have been mistreated. In the past, we only got when an African American shot, the majority person killed. Officer. We weren't getting the real feedback of all the misbehavior that was actually going on across this country. South Carolina, believe it or not, is no different than any other part of this world. The racial hatred, the racial tension is still there. It's just that some of them do it better than others. And so I don't want us to walk away and say what Ben Tillman said or whether this group is holding on to it. But I think a part of what I saw when we took the vote on the flag, and I called for the vote on that flag. I had enough is enough. And then I got up and I gave my speech of what I witnessed in South Carolina as a young child coming through, and I'll share that with you. What I saw is one or two legislators who were able to wrap the flag into Christianity, into religion, and called it the right thing. I think that's where a lot of the misleading behavior is, and the ignorance that you talked about in some of these small towns. I think that's it. And they truly believe that they should be the ones who make all the decisions. I even see legislators who come from small towns who don't act the way I act, who will take on the tough situations, tough issues, because they don't want to be talked about back at home in the small towns. I was at the University of South Carolina doing law students, had Black History Month, and I agreed to talk. And I asked a real question: how many of you would like to see progress in South Carolina back in your hometown? And just about every hand went, well, how many are willing to go back home and make the changes? Very few, because they understand the ignorance of what's going on back in those small towns.
I think as you look at this, it kind of goes back to a book that I read a long time ago by Takaki. It was called A Different Mirror. And that book talked about how during colonial times, the plantation owners realized that they were severely outnumbered both by the working blacks and the working whites. And they took it upon themselves to, at that point, create a middle class so that there would be a buffer between those who were the workers and themselves, who were few in number. When you look at it, if you look at most plantations, if the folks wanted to take over, they could have probably taken over if everyone had united and worked together. But what the strategy was to tell those white workers who were in the group, even though all of these things exist with you, you're still better than blacks. And with that sentiment, it created a rift that, in a lot of places, as the senator said, still exists today. Because you have people in those communities who families have gone generation after generation after generation after generation, and those things have not changed. But it was just so interesting as I read that, a small group could control the minds of others, even though, hey, they didn't want anything much to do with them either, but to make them feel that they were better than the group of African Americans. I saw the, on Saturday I was going toward Charleston, and I saw the motorcycles and cars and all with all the Confederate flags coming toward Columbia. And you understand that, it's not over. In the minds of people, it's not over. Yeah, the flag might be down, yeah, the pole might be gone, but it's not over. And we have to continue to work. Those of us who know better have to continue to work and help others. And your point, so well taken. Nobody wants to go back home. Nobody wants to go back home. I had a basketball player when I was in Savannah, and he came to the University of South Carolina and played, Kenny Holmes. He's one of the top ball players that University of South Carolina had, and I saw him at a funeral we attended, and I walked up to his wife and I said, "How you doing?" She said, "I'm doing good." She said, but I said, "Well, I see you still hanging with this guy." She said, "Yeah, I might as well hang with him now." She said, I married him because I thought he was going to get me out of the embassy. But he came down there one Thanksgiving and went fishing and hunting with my brothers, and I'm still in the embassy and he's in the embassy. So she went back because he went back to the embassy. That was not her plan. Her plan was to marry this guy from Savannah and at least get to Savannah. But it didn't work.
Before we go forward, we have an intimate group here tonight, and what I'd like to do, normally what we do is have you write your questions on cards and I read them. And the reason we do that is sometimes when we ask our questions, we tend to give a defense of a thesis in asking our questions. I'm going to ask you tonight, I'd like to hear what you have to say, but make your question brief. I'd love for you to chime in on this, because I think we have a great opportunity here tonight to have a very powerful discussion. Not only about what the problem is, but I also want to address what do we do about it. Okay, so I'm going to call on Dr. Richardson. I know he's turned to the side here, and he didn't expect this at all. But I know he did. But I know you have something to say on the subject.
Pardon me, because I'm thinking I wasn't expecting this. guess I've been a few places, seen a lot of things. The thing that's bothers me is what you said, the same thing back then is still happening. You go into a store, cashier, black and white, it's there no matter what we do. No matter what we do. And that's the thing that sort of bothers me. The question that you said, what do we do about it? I had a member of my board, South Carolina Institute on Poverty and Deprivation, white, emailed me a picture of the flag and other entities. Here we are under the flag, one side of the flag says take it down, the other one says leave it up. And over here there are flags of education, jobs, health. There's nobody under those things. So I think that as we talk about this, we need to keep in the back of our minds as to how we create systemically a system for each one of those issues. Unless we come out of this with a problem saying here is how we are going to solve this problem, then I think we are missing what all this is about. That's what we do about it. Thank you.
Yes, sir. If you allow, I just want to briefly comment about what you just said. And just add my 1 or 2 cents to it. South Carolina on the whole, as it relates to real African American leadership and change, doesn't want that. It doesn't want that. Real South Carolina as a whole, real leadership for change. People of color don't want that. Now let me qualify that. If we back up and we look at the General Assembly when the Democrats lost the House. They lost the House simply because white switched and became Republicans. And they did the same thing in the Senate. If you look at this last U.S. Senate race, and it just bothers me. And I spoke to a number of senior members within my own group to talk about making that run for the U.S. Senate. And there was a backdraft, a back push as it relates to that. Why? You're too aggressive in how you handle things. I don't say things that make you feel good. I tell you exactly how it is. It's up to you to live with it. It's up to you to like it. They're not quite ready for that. It's almost a pat on the back. Just say a little, just do a little, and we just get by. Let's look at the other side. Those who have been drawn into the other side of the party. Those are soft-speaking people. None of those people talk about fair housing, affordable health care, youth and education. The major program that set back HBCUs across this country was the Parent Plus program. The Parent Plus program changed 2 years ago. And those of you who don't understand the program, that program says that once a student has exhausted all of its federal financial support, the Parent Plus program, the parent can go in and get a loan. Well, let me just tell you, because of that, all of the seniors and juniors and sophomores, and even some freshmen such as Morehouse had to end up rifting teachers, freshmen who thought they could come and couldn't come in because they cut the program and did not give the rest the signal that it was coming. For those who would stand up and actually fight for changes, and say even to the government state affordable health care, the Medicaid program for those who are above the poverty guideline is good for South Carolina. What does it do? And for those healthcare agencies in these small rural towns that people of color go to and create some extra jobs, they said no to. I was there when the Fair Housing Act passed. I wasn't in the General Assembly, I was on council, but I went on the Hill to testify before the